Why, hello, everybody. Welcome to Bookish, again, the virtual program on authors, thinkers, and the literary life, brought to you by the Southern California News Group and the Bay Area News Group. I'm Sam Dunn. I'm the senior editor for premium content here at SCNG, and I'm a book nerd and author myself. Anyway, before we get started, I want to say thank you to our Reader Reward subscribers for your support of our programs. We really, really appreciate it. And by the way, if you're a Reader Rewards member attending tonight, you're automatically entered to win a $50 gift certificate from our partner and one of our favorite independent bookstores in the Los Angeles area, Once Upon a Time. And you can get signed copies from our authors there too. So, and hey, if you're not a subscriber yet, why aren't you a subscriber? Go to scng.com/subscribe to find your local paper. And that way you're going to know about all the great things we've got going on. Before we get started, let me remind you that audience members are muted to allow for the free flow of conversation among the panelists. But if you have a question, and we hope you do, use the Q&A feature on your Zoom toolbar to ask questions live. But if you just want to add a comment, use the chat feature found there on your screen too. Books editor Eric Peterson and I will be behind the scenes monitoring questions and comments, and we'll get to you as much as possible. Also, this session is videotaped and a link is going to be sent to you so you can share or just revisit some of your favorite moments. It's also posted at scng.com/virtual events, and that's where you can find all of our past virtual shows, as well as see what's coming up next. Now, it is my extreme pleasure to introduce our hostess as if she needs an introduction. I mean, she's the writer, performer, and commentator you might know from NPR's Morning Edition and This American Life. She's a contributing editor at The Atlantic too, and the host of the syndicated Radio Minute, The Lowdown on Science. She is the author of many books. Her most recent is The Mad Woman and the Roomba. She does a great karaoke of The Long Run by the Eagles, which I have never mentioned before, and beaming to us from the bohemian splendor of her living room in Pasadena, please welcome my friend Sandra Singlo. Hello, Sandra.
I used to hurry a lot. I used to worry a lot. And they say that when you know Eagles songs, you've been living in California too long.
Yes, that's my contention. Absolutely. Anyway, how are you?
Well, happy April 15th, Samantha. It's tax day, isn't it?
Oh my God, tax day. I knew I forgot something.
But you know, at Bookish, we always put a positive spin on things, right? So you might not know that April 15th is also, cheerfully, the 42nd anniversary of the death of Jean-Paul Sartre. Maybe not so cheerful. The 110th anniversary of the Titanic sinking. Okay.
Another one. Yeah.
But April 15th is also, here's the bright spot, 67th anniversary of the opening of the first McDonald's.
Oh my gosh. Well, can I say I'll have fries with that?
You can.
Anyway, never mind.
So you see, though, how hard we work on this show thematically. In a way, those three anniversaries, all you could say they're existentialism, the Sartre adventure, the Titanic, and Americana. And that sort of serves as points of departure for our three fantastic authors that we have today, Steve Almond, Maggie Shipstead, and David Baldacci.
Oh, that's quite a show. And wow, such mental effort. You could say it was taxing.
Taxing for April 15th. On that note, thank you.
Goodbye.
Let's get going with the show. All right, welcome. First up, we have Steve Almond. Here's the 30-second download. Steve Almond is the author of 12 books of fiction and nonfiction, including the New York Times bestsellers, Candy Freak and Against Football. His recent books include William Stoner and the Battle for the Inner Life, which we'll talk about in a second, and Bad Stories, a literary investigation of the 2016 election, one that stands out in memory. For 4 years, Steve has hosted the New York Times Dear Sugars podcast with his pal Cheryl Strayed. His short stories have been anthologized widely in the Best American Short Stories, Pushcart Prize, Best American Erotica, and the Best American Mysteries series. He beams to us right now from Arlington, Massachusetts, with his family and his anxiety. That's what your bio says. His new novel, which is so fantastic, it's his first, comes out just next month, is called All the Secrets of the World. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. It is good to be in your living room.
Yes, and in your, that's not your living room, is it?
No, this is my panic room.
or your escape room. And so you have 20 minutes, and then at the end, hopefully you'll be able to get up. Okay, so my first question to you is a little bit long, but bear with me because it's sort of a statement and a question.
Okay.
So I can't help. I've spent this time this week kind of researching you on the internet. I know your work anyway, but it seems like you're one of the great talkers of today. You've been co-hosting with Cheryl Strayed, Dear Sugars. You've done amazing work on Mark Maron's WTF podcast. You have this viral talk, this incredible 9-minute talk on Toto's Bless the Rain down in Africa, which is so funny and hilarious, and it's almost like a TED Talk. And then I would say I'm now almost done with the question, of the over 100 authors that we've had on this show, you are the most fabulously eclectic in terms of the topics you've covered. You've explored candy. You've memorably said you've eaten a piece of candy every day of your life. We'll have to ask if you did that today. Football, erotica, politics, and the obscure but brilliant 1965 novel Stoner Bird, John Edward Williams, where in your book, which is about reading and writing and the struggle to pay attention to our lives. Ooh. Okay, that's what the
Just so you know, I always have it close at hand.
We've done the candy. We will not cover the erotica because it's a family show. But regarding, and I think at the opening of your Stoner book, and I think that sets up your book for today, where you say, I think it was like in 95, what was it? The age of 28, you abandoned journalism to write short stories. And by my math, that's not too far from when you started thinking about your current novel, which took 3 decades in the making. So this is this kind of like loose, shaggy monster of a question of kind of like your writer's journey. Steve, how did it start?
Right.
And how did we get to your novel now? Go.
Okay, so a very focused question. Good. Well, it sounded more like it took you 35 years to write a novel. Explain. And the short version is I've written lots of novels and they are mercifully unpublished because they were just awful. And I just want to say to anybody who is a writer out there, or like, I think we all know our little secret hidey holes have all of the prose that wasn't good enough to see the light of day. And we carry around a lot of shame about that. I certainly did for many years, and really beat myself up and said, I'm a failed novelist, which was sort of self-pitying and narcissistic all at once. And at a certain point, even though this idea had been gestating for a long, long time, I just gave up because it struck me as too self-punishing to keep trying to write books and novels specifically and just fail at them. And at that precise moment that I said, okay, maybe you're never going to be able to scale that particular mountain, this idea that had been germinating and kind of marinating in the subconscious for 4 decades really just started to write itself. And I don't know about your experience, Sandra, but there are 2 kinds of writing that I do. The first is me pushing around the characters, hoping that they bump into some big ticket item. And that's the usual process. Those are mostly the books that end up failing because I don't know the story, so I end up flogging the language. But then with this book, I had a very unprecedented and delightful experience of literally just chasing the story, of being pulled through it, mostly by the young heroine of the book, Lorena, who's just this junkyard dog of a person who has everything stacked against her like good old Jane Eyre and is just indomitable. And it was so delightful for me to be able to root for a character that hard and push them through all the weirdness in this book, because it's not the book I was expecting to write. Everybody who reads it is like, aren't you like the neurotic, horny Jewish guy? Like, what's all this about, this big crazy social novel? And I always have to say, I don't know. Lorena came to me and then I just started chasing her.
Right, and viewers should know it's set in the 80s. It's in 1981 in the Reagan years. It's in Sacramento, California. And she's like a middle schooler, really bright and very, very well described and depicted about somebody who doesn't want to be seen in science class. So it really takes this very personal, very specific teen girl, and all of this stuff happens. So you feel it was, and there's also, I have to say, without giving the plot away, well, let's say she comes across, let's say, a scientist who works with scorpions.
Yep.
And scorpions are a big metaphor in this book, and they're so natural and effective and powerful. Part of me was going, did the scorpions idea, like, so you're saying that it began with Lorena?
Well, that's not even true. It began with a friend of mine in junior high school whose dad was abducted or disappeared in the desert. And I believe that writers end up writing about, whether it's fiction or nonfiction or even poetry, we write about the stuff that remains unresolved in our psyche. The story is an attempt to sort our way through these bewilderments. So that, from when I'm maybe 13 years old, and I remember going to their house, it was a big scandal at school, and seeing the mom in this family, and her beautiful hair had turned white overnight, and that image stayed with me and wound up in the book. Years later, I was knocking around El Paso, Texas, reviewing hair metal bands and being a narcissistic, idiotic 21-year-old. And these scorpiologists took me out into the desert, and they asked me to close my eyes, and they flicked on this giant ultraviolet lamp, and all of a sudden the sand all around it, so the oceanic sand of the desert, suddenly lit up with what seemed to me like 1,000 of those glow-in-the-dark toys that they used to put in cereal boxes. And then those little toys started to move, and I realized, these are scorpions. They fluoresce. This world around me is alive with creatures who are secretive and dangerous and both predatory and also fearful. And so that, that's those images and those experiences stayed with me. What it was like to live on the border and realize that what immigration boils down to in this country is that we criminalize the American dream for certain populations. That's just what we do. And all of that really stayed with me. I wasn't thinking about it in a literary way, a thoughtful way, an empathic way at 25 or 35 or even 45. But by the time I got into my 50s and had beaten myself up enough, I was ready for all of those stories to kind of be fed by my artistic unconscious and take shape. And then old Nancy Reagan showed up, and astrology and astronomy and the battle we're litigating between science and faith, and I feel the reason I was drawn to scorpions is because they're like these little secretive creatures, and they're very frightened, and but they're also viewed as very dangerous and predatory. And I kind of feel like that's human beings. We walk around with all these secrets exploding inside of us. And what makes a book interesting is when characters have secrets and they're at risk of getting loose.
Yeah, and I think the scorpions are so beautifully described, and they come up they're almost like characters in the story, and there's certain mini genuses or genia, like this is the type of scorpion whose bite is only like a wasp's bite, and the other, and so they become actually characters in the book. And again, without giving away the plot, it is very interesting how some are some the humans are sort of like scorpions, but that isn't the worst thing about them. Like scorpions are, to say humans are like scorpions is almost like insulting the scorpion.
It is insulting the scorpions. And this is what Lorena really gets involved with intellectually, emotionally, to some small extent, sort of erotically, with this scientist, this scorpiologist. And that's what he understands. Human beings we make up stories. We consciously keep secrets from one another. We're in a state of inner conflict, and that inner conflict is kind of constantly being visited on the world around us. Animals are not like beautiful, blessed creatures, but they are not burdened with all of the mishigas of a consciousness. They're not manipulative. They don't lie, they don't attempt to lie and to themselves or others in their species. And that's what Marcus Stallworth, this character in Lorena, kind of see, that the world of humans is inherently a world of deceit and therefore a world of great danger.
Yeah, and I think the time has flown. I can't believe it. We haven't even talked about Toto yet. And it's kind of like, it's like we're
talking about human sin. We should start with Toto.
Bless the rain down in Africa. Oh my goodness. Okay. I think though, to end and I'm going to say what a reader of yours and a fan wrote about your recent book, which was very interesting. I thought you have really smart readers, and who called it transcendent. And she said, and this sort of sums it up, and then you can respond and just or say thank you. I'm a Steve Almond fan, anthologies, political nonfiction, etc., and is a fan of John Williams stoner novel. So I think there's a whole, viewers should know there's a whole stoner cult. Join it now. It's very interesting. And she said, she summed all your work up together. I love the particularly Steve Almond theme. Wait for it. How distorted our reality is by exaggerations, part truth, and lack of nuance, because blanket good and bad stories fuel our lust for drama and sense of superiority, and how transformation only comes from exploring the dark matter within us. How well do you think Betsy R. did in
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's a more eloquent way of describing the human dilemma, the human arrangement, which is we're capable of creating these bad stories that don't serve us, they don't serve the people around us, but they sort of keep us protected from too much excessive feeling, from the danger of being too truthful, or identifying some really complicated conflict within ourselves that we can't resolve. Lorena desperately has been told all her life to remain invisible because it's not safe to be seen. And at the same time, she's 14 years old, she's smart as hell, and she wants to be seen. She wants to be apprehended and understood and activated in some way. And so she allows that. She sort of steps into this world with horrible consequences that she couldn't have possibly anticipated. But what I really wanted to do with all the characters, and I hope I did, is forgive them all. Try to understand. I think it's a social novel, really. And that means you're interested in situations where power collides with people who are powerless. But ultimately, I didn't want anybody to get flattened out, not even Nancy Reagan. She is an astrological Gucci drunk ditz who like da-da-da-da-da. I've got my whole line where I kind of flatten her out like Bless the Rains down in Africa, and kind of in my head, I'm writing my own version of sort of flattening her out into a silly person, a trivial person, or a destructive person. But the more I wrote, the more I realized, wait a second, even Nancy Reagan, I understand her husband was shot. She adored her husband. She believed that he was sent to rescue the country. Even though she's monstrously naive, I understand why she would put her faith in any belief system, even in including astrology, if she thought it would mean keeping her husband safe. So in the end, like, my goal is sort of to forgive human beings all their bad stories, myself included.
Well, it's a fantastic novel. It's a great read. And I think you accomplished all of that. Your new book, which is called All the Secrets of the World. And I think what we take away is we're all Scorpions, and that's fine. And we can have candy every day.
And Scorpios, the best sign. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, we'll be fighting over that. Thank you so much, Steve Almond. It's great talking to you. All right. Next up, Maggie Shipstead, the 30-second download. Maggie Shipstead is the New York Times bestselling author of the novels Seating Arrangements, Astonish Me, and Great Circle. The critically acclaimed Great Circle, it was a national and international literary sensation, was, yes, shortlisted for the Booker Prize, which is a good prize, sure, but also was one of Southern California News Group's 10 noteworthy books of 2021. She's a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, recipient of a fellowship from the NEA, National Endowment for the Arts, winner of the Dylan Thomas Prize and the LA Times Book Prize for First Fiction, and we're delighted that she makes her home right here in Los Angeles. Her new book, Just How, is a fantastic short story collection that you must get called You Have a Friend in 10A. Welcome, Maggie.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
We're so delighted to have you. So if you could talk a little bit about, I mean, you've just come off Great Circle, which is a huge book in so many ways, 610 pages, epic, took you the reported 7 years to write it. So, and now you have a book of short stories. Can you talk a little bit, just to set the stage, about a little bit of your process of creating the Great Circle, and then how that compares to making your short stories?
Sure, yeah. Well, Great Circle, as you said, was my third novel, and my other two books I wrote within a year each. And so I kind of had this idea of myself as like, I just sort of whip off these novels, I toss them out, it's no big deal. And I think if I'd known what I was getting into with Great Circle, it would have given me pause. Like, I really wasn't expecting. It took me over 3 years to write the first draft, which was 980 pages. And it was just sort of constant research, you know, it's like swimming upstream because it's historical, it's about aviation. It takes place in a lot of different places. So that was just this huge undertaking, and the defining challenge of it was stamina and just not getting overwhelmed. I was always sort of recalibrating. And short stories, so this collection has 10 stories, and the first one in it, both chronologically and in the table of contents, is a Cowboy Tango, which I wrote my second year of grad school, like 14 years ago when I was 24. And then the most recent one I wrote in 2017. So there's sort of, in some ways, like along the way they got written. I, something there, I think of stories in a way as sort of a laboratory. Like if I want to investigate a setting or a character or a structural approach or something, and I can do it without this commitment of multiple years. But I do think that stories are difficult too, and just in a completely different way, as I'm sure you know very well.
Yeah, and I think well, and another thing that happened on Great Circle that you weren't able to do in the pandemic as much is you traveled all over. I mean, you kind of went to Antarctica. I mean, you went all over. You're not a sedentary short story kind of like, oh, Iowa writers. You are really an adventurous out there that I guess that would help your writing, but also does it hinder it? I mean, how does that travel affect your writing process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Great Circle, I started writing for travel magazines. I started writing Great Circle in fall 2014. And later that year, I started writing for travel magazines kind of by chance. And so during the time I was drafting that book, I was traveling and I would pitch places I wanted to go because the main character of the book disappears while flying around the world north-south. And so I, tried to get to the Arctic and the Antarctic. And it was both completely inspirational and completely disruptive. And in some ways, I feel like writing pieces for travel magazines has a lot in common with short stories. It's always so much harder than I think it's going to be every time. It never seems to get easier. It's always this like feat of compression to sort of get, context of the place and my impression of the place and my basic point all into 3,000 words. Um, Whereas the novel is sort of this just underlaid my life for years and years. But yeah, it was. It was both really set me back and really propelled me forward.
And well, I think what you're talking about compression is really interesting because like I think I mentioned to you before the show, it's like this short story collection like gives me faith in short stories again. There was a while, the archetypal while where the short stories were really quiet and nothing happened and everyone went, what happened? And these all like and the Cowboy Tango is one where so many years are compressed in such a short time that you almost have to understand the novel to write a great short story. And I just want to give the viewers a teaser of a place to start writing, to start reading all of your stuff. I mean, at the beginning of last year, you had a much beloved Modern Love column, which is called, and I'm just going to share with viewers for a second, and like my 5-week long first date. I think even that title, you go, that could be a novella right there, and it begins. You won't like his body. My mother said, when I told her I was going on a 5-week long first date to an ice-covered continent with someone nearly her age. It won't be what you're used to. Ominously, she added, you won't like his toenails. So I defy anybody viewing now to not run after the show is done and like to read how it turned out. And I think not only is that a great teaser, but I think even that essay is a master mini class in compression, because you actually say that. It's kind of like it would take a long time to say this, long time to say that, long time. But in saying that, you tell the story of what happened.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, I think in some ways that format, the compressed format for that particular anecdote from my life is sort of merciful because it lets me boil it down and not get bogged down in the details. And I also wrote it initially, or a version of it, for a like a storytelling event at a restaurant. So I wrote it with the intention of saying it out loud, which I think probably should be instructive to me in some way because I think that really helped me hear it as I was writing it and sort of think about what I would be comfortable saying face to face with a room full of people. And yeah, I got sort of felt like I got to the bones of it relatively easily. And, some stories are like that. I just have a pleasant day at the desk and get it out. And then others I grapple with for months. And it's sort of mysterious to me why. It feels like just a feeling, or in some ways like a mental trick you play on yourself. Like when you really believe you can write the story, you can, and you have to sort of pretend to be that person.
Yeah, no, and I've heard what is that kind of like in theater, it's like an arrow in time. So you're dealing against time, and books are a whole world or continent that you can
Mm.
explore. And I think that it's interesting because your short stories could be read out loud, of course, but I found myself sometimes in reading some of them, and it's such a great collection of completely different worlds. Every new page, new first page, you go in a place, and then I found myself reading along, and then I go, wait a minute. And then I went back and then reread to make sure I was picking up all the details. It was really fun to do. And that sometimes I would go to the last page and I would reread the short story again.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you. Yeah, it's gonna be, this is really the first time I'm talking about this collection. I've still, because Great Circle just came out in paperback, and so this week every day I've done a Zoom where I talk about Great Circle, and so switching gears to the stories is sort of challenging, partly because I've never felt like I knew how they connect to each other, and sort of, I hope my agent's not on this because she's always like, you have to find a way to explain why they're connected. But I think fundamentally they're not. They're really different pieces from different moments in my life and sort of different kind of, I don't know, isolated stars of interest that then I sort of got out of my system and moved on from. But I also think, I took a creative writing workshop in college, or I took two, and then I went to Iowa. And for me, just the process of learning to write fiction, it was so helpful to be able to put the beginning, middle, and end in front of a workshop. Like, workshop's not for everybody. You certainly don't need an MFA, but for me, just that putting a complete story and hearing the feedback on it, I think really accelerated my learning curve in a way that if I'd been trying to write novels from the beginning, I don't think I would have had the same benefit at all.
Yeah, no, I actually felt by like the time I got to the last story, it dovetailed with the opening story. So I
Mm.
felt like, and people can go, it's a new book, so college classes people have not yet had time to write it in their major, but I think they could find girlhood, ferality, nature, like there's a lot of resonances that they keep flipping around. And I
Hmm.
think with I forget one story, that I wonder if other readers will have this. So they'll start going, wait, are you commenting on this earlier story with this? And given that I think it's a second story that is a slightly self-conscious, hilarious
Oh,
literary piece, that you start then wondering, I mean, to have that so early in the book, I think it resonates. It's a great read.
thank you.
Guys.
Yeah, I wrote that story, Acknowledgements, after I'd spent a semester teaching in an MFA program, which is not coincidental. Um, and Backcountry, the story you're mentioning at the end,
Right.
set in Montana as well as Cowboy Tango. When I wrote Cowboy Tango, I hadn't been to Montana. I was driving back to Iowa from California for my second year. And for some reason, I just got it into my head that I should write a cowboy story. And so I had a story due, in a few weeks. And so that's what came out. And then Backcountry I wrote after I'd spent 2 months in Missoula, years later, and had more of a knowledge of the place. And it's set on this unfinished ski resort mountain. And there is a mountain like that outside Missoula where you see these runs cut in the mountain, but they've never been used. So yeah, it's funny what will trigger a story, and what my first two novels also started as short stories. And then I think because Great Circle was the first one that didn't, was part of the reason why it just like oozed out into what it became.
And I'm glad that you bring up Missoula, because we are so glad, as I said, that you have settled, at least for the moment, in Los Angeles. And I think that's very heartening to some of us in the Southland. This is the Southern California news group, and we have palm trees in our logo. So it's kind of like, yeah, book. So when your book got such incredible acclaim, it's like, yeah, Southern California. But could you, and Los Angeles is not known as being that hospitable to literary types, F. Scott Fitzgerald notwithstanding. Could you say why you live here, what you like about living in Los Angeles?
I love LA. I grew up in Orange County, and I really didn't have, after I left for college, I really didn't plan to come back to California. But I had a fellowship at Stanford, and so when I was 26, and so I came back, and I think re-encountering California as an adult, as opposed to a sort of surly teenager, made me understand what's so great about it. But yeah, I settled in LA in 2014. My parents live in San Diego, so they're close but not too close. I had a pre-existing group of friends here, But I like it. I like the sort of weirdness of it. I think it's beautiful in its own sort of occasionally grungy way. I like the diversity of it and in terms of everything, people, landscape. I think, yeah, and for being a fiction writer, I think there's actually a nice privacy in that. Like sometimes I'll meet new people and I say, "Oh, I'm a writer." And it's like, "Well, what show do you write for?" "No, I write books." And there's sort of this like, why are you just, generating IP to make shows out of? Is that the point? And I kind of like that. I like that people aren't so, there's not like a sort of Brooklyn scene here. Although two of my very closest friends in LA are both novelists who are also TV writers. So, I think there is sort of a stealth literary scene. Did you think?
Yeah, and Steve Almond is saying generating IP. He does like that. I just see him in the chat. Yeah, I think that's so. And I think that you have also, said this thing about that success can discourage boldness, right? Because the more attention that's paid to you, and in a way, it's fantastic. Like some people, after having like a huge success, like we've been like Great Circle, it's like I must spend another 20 years writing an even more big and important book, as opposed to like, and here short, like changing it up, and that's really fantastic. So
I always need to do something different. And I think my next novel is going to be a lot smaller in scope, sort of intentionally. I think you just can't try to replicate or redo each book, or I can't. And I definitely wouldn't do another epic for lots of reasons right now.
So the penguins in Antarctica will have to miss you for a while.
I have to wait, yeah.
And I should say then people can go to your website to see about all your books and also read how that modern love thing came out. It's a fantastic story. Anyway, well, we look so much forward to your next book and the current short story collection. I think it's a masterwork in short story writing, and it is really connected, and people can figure out how when they read it. So
thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on. Maggie Shipstead, her fantastic new short story collection is You Have a Friend in 10A. Thank you so much. And last but not least, we have David Baldacci. And if you are not among the 150 million people or who have bought his book, I will give you the 30-second download. And here it is. David Baldacci has been, and I think this is really fun. I happen to love this introduction, has been writing since childhood when his mother gave him a lined notebook for writing his stories. Much later, she revealed that she did it to keep him quiet, quote unquote, because every mom needs a break now and then. Thank you, David Baldacci's mom. He published his first novel, Absolute Power, in 1996, which Clint Eastwood legendarily made into a movie that he directed and starred in. And it is fantastic. It's just classic Clint. And if you see it, like, you'll be amazed at all the people that are in it that are legendary people today. It's just a fantastic classic movie. In total, David has published 44 best-selling novels in over 45 languages in more than 80 countries, with over 150 million copies sold worldwide. He's also published 7 novels for young readers. David is also a devoted philanthropist, well-known, and his greatest efforts are dedicated to his family's Wish You Well Foundation, which supports U.S. literacy for families and individuals in America, and which is an amazing, amazing foundation. His third Aloysius Archer book, Aloysius, that's how I say it, I read it, I don't hear it. Book Dreamtime, his book Dreamtown comes out in just 4 days. Dreamtown, and he's here. Welcome, David. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, it's great to be here.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so this series, apparently when you introduced this new detective, you did so in part, you say, to scare yourself in writing this new series.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, you got to do that. I think if you've been writing a long time like I have, you have to get out of your comfort zone, try a new challenge, something you've never done before. I'd never written historical fiction before. One of the greatest screenplay writers ever, William Goldman, who did the screenplay for Absolute Power, told me one time that his greatest fear was that someone was going to wake up and figure out he had no idea what the hell he was doing. And I think that's what all creative people sort of fear, but fear is a great antidote to complacency. So if you scare yourself while you're writing, you get edgier, the chip grows on the shoulder, you just care more. So that's what I try to do. And, having the Aloysius Archer series with the latest with Dreamtown, that was a way for me to scare myself.
Yes, no, absolutely. Aloysius. Yes, that's the way that you say that. And so you did research on this, and I wonder if you could tell viewers a little bit about this book that is such a page turner, so fantastic, so readable.
So Archer was a veteran in World War II. Then he went to prison for a while for a crime that he mostly didn't commit, and decided he wanted to be a detective. So he eventually makes his way to California. And in the second novel, A Gambling Man, he was in Baytown, California. Fictitious name, don't try to find it. And he worked under the tutelage of a legendary gumshoe named Willie Dash. Now, in this novel, Dreamtown, he's been a detective for over 3 years, most of it in LA. This is 1953, sort of the golden age of Hollywood. So he's in his heyday. He knows what he's doing, and he gets involved in a mystery on New Year's Eve, 1952. Sort of pushes him through what Hollywood, both the glamour side and the underbelly side, was back then. And I love that time period. Two of my favorite movies are Chinatown and The Big Sleep. It's just something very atmospheric about the 40s and 50s, and I try to bring that alive in this series.
No, it's really delicious, and I would say reading the book, like you want to pour yourself a cocktail, a gimlet with 3 pearl onions. You want to have steak. I mean, just the places that you describe, Chasen's, you know, Tiny Nailers, the Formosa Cafe, and everybody's having like a finger of scotch pretty much every morning. That, as you say, becomes a hand. So, how did you delve in? Do you enjoy researching, and how did you do it?
I really did. Well, first of all, you know, my father and aunts and uncles are from that time period, and I just learned a lot about that time period growing up. My older brother is an artist, and his favorite time period was the 40s and 50s in Hollywood. So I grew up, I've seen more pictures of Rita Hayworth than I think anybody other than my brother has on Earth. So I was really steeped in that time period and knew a lot about it. I've read most of the books in that time period. I've seen most of the movies. For this one, I read a lot of books. I did a lot of research online. I took this YouTube video. If you want to do anything, you don't know how to do it, go to YouTube. I found this YouTube video from 1952. This guy in his car took a 25-minute video of himself going down the strip in Vegas. So I got to see the strip in Vegas in real time in 1952. And that was almost like being there. I mean, it was like having my own little time machine. So anywhere I could find out stuff about that time period, people I would talk to, we go online. I did, like, compose, compile this huge, set of notebooks. And of course, with all research and writing a novel, you have to leave almost all of it out because you're not writing a textbook, you're writing a novel. You've got to take bits and pieces that really are important to the plot and help flesh out the characters and put those in.
And well, one quick question before actually going to your writing. I have to go back to the bars that you described and the Chinatown, like it is so visceral. I wonder, and this is like, it's a curious question. Do you have a favorite bar in the world?
I've been to lots of different bars. I don't really remember the names that much, but I do remember, that bars are a great place as a writer just to sit and soak it all up. I mean, I have come up, I have taken, elements of people I've seen in lots of bars and grafted them onto characters because I found them so interesting. The way they hold a glass, the way they talk, the way they smoked a cigarette, the way they just look blankly at the mirror and all the bottles in front of it. So I've done a lot of that over my life. I think when people are a little bit, drunk, you see the real side of them and how they actually interact with other people. And that's pretty fascinating to me. And look, being a writer is being an observer. People say, where do you get your ideas from? And my answer is simple. I wake up every day and I walk out the door and I don't stare at my phone. I'm watching what's happening around me. And those are where the ideas come from.
And I mean, and people always ask that. You have so many fans and they always want to know about like your writing process. And I know you've been asked that a million times, like but you were so prolific of amazing books. You come out with them, I think, about twice a year, right? There's the spring and then there's the fall. I mean, do you have any, what's your day like? And I'm sorry to ask that, you've been asked so many times, but.
Yeah, I mean, my days are typical for being atypical. I don't write every single day. I don't count words, I don't count pages. When I sit down to write and I'm in the zone, I can write anywhere, planes, trains, automobiles, in the middle of the party, it doesn't really matter. That's the perfect place to write, is in your head. So when I'm primed and the idea is crystallized, I write nonstop until my tank is completely empty. I could write, 10,000 words in a day, 25 pages in a day, or I could write 2 pages in a day and 500 words. It doesn't really matter so long it's what I wanted to get out that day. And then I don't outline the whole book. I've never known the ending of a novel before I sat down to write it. It's sort of a journey for me to get there. I need to get feel my characters. I need to spend some time with them on the page to see what they're really, capable of and where I'm going to go with them. And they need to sort of speaking to me as well. And that all takes time. Look, I know there are a lot of writers who have to have the outline before they can do anything, and that's fine if it works for you. My advice is find the process that works best for you. It may be outline everything, it may be outline a little bit, and maybe outline nothing, just sit down and wing it and see where you go. And guess what? Over the course of a career, your process may change, and that's perfectly fine. There are no rules to this game, only what makes you productive, efficient, and comfortable. And so for me, it's kind of an amalgam. I'll outline a chapter here or a chapter there. I'll do some macro plotting, some micro plotting. But I really, when I'm first starting a project, I'm itching to do that first couple of chapters. And, I'm baring my teeth to get to that point. And then from there, I just sort of figure it out. And I see where I want to go. I get to know my characters. I do some research along the way. I come with new plot points and twists and all that. And then off to the races.
Okay, well, let's tease that out a little bit with this particular book. So it's the first couple chapters that get you going. Are you thinking, is it the New Year's Eve party, the woman, the dark-haired woman coming with a secret that how that, that she is not telling all that she knows? It's like, how did this book start before it gets it? And the plot is amazing, and there's so many twists and turns. The characters come at you. The women are fantastic in this book. It is so and they're beautifully drawn and quite modern, I have to say, but of the time period. So how did this book evolve?
So when I was writing the first chapter, it seemed very important to me that I needed to establish the identity of what this was about. And to do that, I needed to really establish the identity of LA/Hollywood in 1952. So the way to do that, I could have done it a number of ways. The way I decided to do it was introduce Archer and his cool car, the Delahaye. At the same time, I introduced the city. So I got sort of a trifecta. So you see Archer, you see the car, and you see the cities he's driving down, and he sort of explains to you, this is LA, and this is my perception of LA. You get, that there's not a whole lot of commitment in the city. They have a big Hollywood sign where people jump off because they can't make it as an actor. They have the LAPD, which back then was one of the largest criminal enterprises in the world. So you get you get his take on everything. So one, you get to know the city, but you get to know Archer and what his vibe is like. I like to really be efficient. I used to write scripts for a while. I like to be efficient with scenes. So if a scene can have more than one purpose, there's nothing wrong with that. So I established the city, I established Archer as a character. Then, he meets up with Liberty Callahan, his girlfriend / aspiring actress. And then I knew that I really wanted to establish a case that he was going to be working on relatively quickly. So when they went to the restaurant, Chasen's Eleanor Lamb, who's a screenwriter, comes up and tells Archer, my God, you're a detective, somebody's trying to kill me. And that was sort of, okay, that's the springboard. Now I have lots of directions I could go in. I could have gone A, B, C, D, E. It's like, which door do I want to go down? And I decided to, let them continue on finishing out New Year's Eve. But at the same time, they go to a party, and what happens, he learns more about Eleanor Lamb. He learns more about her backstory, about the people she works with. So it's not just I'm playing out the LA thing on New Year's Eve. He's also working the case already. And then there's the scene in Malibu and what happens out there. And then the plot really gets turbocharged because I've laid out so many different avenues for me to move forward. People, I've had so many writers come to me, aspiring writers, and they say, I can't get past the first chapter. I've read the first chapter and I don't know where to go. So I try to set up my first chapters such that I've got so much fuel in those first few chapters. My problem is I have too many directions I can go in. Not that I can't think of someplace else to go with this plot. So with Archer, that, once he got out to Malibu, then the pedal went right down to the metal and boom, we're gone.
Yeah, and City of Angels, really not. And then I love the way that you set up his car and not to give anything away at the end of the book, when another car comes up, and not to get and it's kind of, oh, I see. I thought it was a cool car, but now the next model comes along. So it's fun reading your books because, the cars play out, the clothes play out, all the detail that is part of the story. Like you're saying, a scene does many things. And it pays off. Yeah. Yeah,
it absolutely is. And back then, we had gone through a depression. We had gone through a world war. People were sick of sacrificing and fighting and doing without. And they just wanted fun. They wanted to have a good time. The 50s were sort of fun for lots of people. They wanted prosperity. They wanted peace. A lot of them, pulled up roots and headed west. because it was like the streets were paved with gold. All the women looked like Rita Hayworth, and you can make a lot of money in California, all of which was true for some. But the thing is, when you went out there and there's all that prosperity, guess what follows prosperity? Crime, criminals. They go where the money is, because that's what their whole business is about. So when you have the added element of Hollywood, you have this glitz and the glamour. What I try to show you, there's this underbelly to it that people have read about in other books, but I try to really hone in specifically on the underbelly of this town in this book and what it meant to Archer and the people he loved and cared about. That it's really the business that, no matter how big and famous you get, at some point you're going to reach the zenith, and then the fall is precipitous. I mean, it's like a rocket ship crashing down to Earth. Because once you've tasted that, there's nothing else like it. And the day comes when you never taste it again. I can't imagine there could be anything more depressing.
Yeah, and I think what you do, and especially I gotta say, the women characters are the ones that really stay with me, because there's so many of them. They're so interesting, and just when you think, and the whole Jade Lion, like the China, there's so many venues that are unforgettable, and you can see them in your mind's eye, and then you meet the people who designed them, and that when you think that person is pathetic or whatever, she tells her story in a slightly different way. That's what makes it just fascinating reading.
Yeah, I really wanted to highlight, look, the 50s and 60s and 70s, but in the 50s, it was great unless you were a person of color or a woman. Then it was not so great, because you really had no rights at all. You were second, third class citizens. It was ruled by white men back then. I mean, I wanted to highlight the women in various roles. There are 3 or 4 that are pretty significant. And what I wanted to show was, even though they were never going to be the center of attention, they survived by any means possible. And they did what they needed to do to survive. Yeah, you couldn't get a loan as a woman back then. You just couldn't. You had to have a male co-signer. You couldn't really do anything without a guy back then. If you were a person of color, it was hard to survive back then. So for me, I wanted to highlight, some of the strategies and tactics people like that would do to not only survive, but thrive in the only way they could, because the conventional means of rising and ambitions were cut off to them. They were just cut off. They couldn't do it that way. So they tried to do it another way.
Yeah, and as you're talking, I'm reminded how much you actually learn about the period and era, but it didn't feel like I was getting educated anything. You're reading about characters. They are survivors. They mention something, and I think with the men having to sign with the houses, they mention something in passing, but they are fascinating, and they move very quickly through what they're doing. And how many more of these books? And I have to say that the chat, people are loving that. It's Vicky Mello says enjoyable and informative. And somebody, Linda Bowen, I think, said David Baldacci makes it sound so easy, which is hilarious. So it's not, no. And so you're saying, no, unlike what Linda Bowen says, it's not easy. What's the hardest part for you? And you make it sound easy.
Yeah, I think for me, the hardest part is keeping everything fresh. And I think that's one reason why I have so many series going, because a series for me represents another challenge, another pathway to get out of my comfort zone, scare myself. I don't want to become complacent. I don't want to become a book factory. I want to be a writer that's engaged with every story that I tell. So I think that's the hardest part, is to remain fresh and engaged and not drop into sort of, how did I do it last time kind of thing. I never want to ask myself, how did I do it last time, and just write the same book and change the names. I always want to go forward and go, how can I do it differently this time? What other challenge can I present to myself? There's so much. Writing is frustrating and hard, and some days are great, some days suck. It's just the way it is with any creative process like that. For me, I love when the book is done and then I print it all out. I've edited it a million times on the computer, but I print it all out, huge mass. I take my pens and I just bloody it every page. That for me is the best fun, because that's when you take a pile of paper and turn it into a novel that people are actually be interested in and enjoy reading. So that's really where truth comes out. That's where all the details really, come together to make sense. That's when you're not making sausage, you're making something special.
And one final writing question. I mean, your dialogue is fantastic. It just like pops a lot. It's like you can almost just read the dialogue, and the characters are fully expressed in the dialogue. A French woman sounds like they're so distinct, the characters are. And of course, the absolute power, which I just saw again very recently. And of course, the way Clint Eastwood says those lines, it's almost like he's in there will be some character. I think Sam Malloy was the one where I go, oh, that feels like the cadet, like that is so Clint-ish. So do you, I mean, do we picture David Baldacci? Are you pacing around your office saying dialogue? Like are you just typing? What, like, tell us.
No, I will say, I will speak the dialogue out loud just to make sure it feels not wooden to my ears. It feels like it's, right and true and authentic. Typically, my first passes of dialogue are too long. I have too many words in them. I slash them, cut them down. People, depending on whether you know somebody really well or not, you'll be reserved or open. You'll be verbose or reserved and not say a whole lot. So I think the best dialogue is the ones that's been sort of shaved to the bone. I just want to make sure I convey information and I also convey sort of who that character is. You were talking about the French woman in the book. I really, I kept going back and forth with that dialogue and making sure that I wasn't overselling it. I was giving it just enough that okay, she's not an American-born speaker. She's, this is her second language. But I didn't want her to come across as me trying to pretend, okay, this is a French woman. Just so it's a French woman. I just want you to know that she's from France originally, not her first language, and she had some important information to convey because she was a significant character. But I think when you do dialogue, slash it to the bone.
No, that's brilliant. And I think in that scene where she only mentions cafe, like a couple lines down when she gets more intimate with the guy, I think it's incredible. Your dialogue alone could be a play. And there's Samantha letting us know the time has flown by. David Baldacci, you are fantastic. And your new book, Dreamtown, drops in 4 days and everyone should get it. And it's really an honor to chat with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And thank you, Sandra, as ever. And thanks, Steve, and thank Maggie. And thanks also to Julie Corlett, who is our production manager, and she's like the Oz behind the curtain. So thanks for that, Julie.
And I'm waving to Eric Peterson as I turn my video. Hi, Eric.
Well, we'll get to Eric. Don't worry. Eric will get his time in the sun in mere seconds. But first, I want to say, don't forget the copies of the books by today's featured authors, and they're available at Once Upon a Time Bookstore. And here he is, the man, the myth, the legend, our book section editor, Eric Peterson, to tell you what we've got coming up in the newspaper and the newsletter for our book coverage. Eric.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Great show, as always. This is not my moment in the sun because I tan too easily and burn. But we do have coming up, we've got a great story. We've got more with David Baldacci. We've got a wonderful story with Bonnie Garmis, who wrote Lessons in Chemistry, which I'm sure you probably have heard about. A wonderful book, and she's got a great story. Her debut novel coming out when she's 64. And it's wonderful. You should read that one. We've got a great interview with the author of a book called Ruse. He was a former corporate spy. It is gripping. It is an interesting interview. So check all that out, and also check out the Book Pages newsletter if you want more, because that's what it is. It's more. This week we're talking about New York Review of Books. That's just one that I grabbed off my desk. You know them. They all have colorful spines. It's great. It's a lot of fun, and a lot of people were contributing. So please check it out. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me. Thanks to the panelists today. It's great.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it, as always. And everybody, if you've got your thoughts from today, or if you have suggestions, or if you have additional questions, please email us at events@scng.com. We love to hear your suggestions. And anyway, we hope to see you next month. We've got Don Winslow and Melissa Chadburn and other surprise guests coming. So anyway, have a great weekend, everybody. And if you celebrate, have a good Passover and a happy Easter. Bye.